Welcome back, everyone. Ready to dive into another fascinating topic?
Absolutely. Always excited to explore new ideas.
Today, we're going back in time, way back. We're going to be looking at ancient empires and not just their military might, but how they controlled vast territories through information networks.
Yes. It's amazing how often we overlook the importance of information in shaping history. It's not all about brute force, you know. Controlling the flow of information was absolutely crucial for these empires, sometimes even more so than military strength.
So it wasn't just about conquering new lands, it was about conquering minds.
Exactly. Think about ancient Rome, for instance. Everyone pictures those legions marching off to conquer new territories. But those iconic Roman roads weren't just pathways for armies.
They were the information superhighways of their time.
Precisely. Those roads were the nervous system of the empire, transmitting vital information along with troops and supplies. Messengers and officials could travel quickly, relaying orders from the emperor, news from distant provinces, you name it. That kind of speed and efficiency was unheard of in earlier times.
So it's kind of like how our bodies respond to stimuli. You touch something hot, your nervous system sends a signal to your brain, you react instantly. The Roman roads were like that for the empire, allowing them to respond to threats, manage resources, and maintain control.
Absolutely. And just like our nervous system, Roman roads weren't random paths. They were meticulously planned, strategically built, and maintained to make sure information flowed smoothly and reliably across the empire.
They were already thinking about logistics and efficiency on a massive scale.
And they took it a step further with the cursus publicus.
The what?
The cursus publicus. It was their version of a postal service, a sophisticated network of relay stations, each with fresh horses. Messages could travel incredibly fast across the empire.
Wow, relay stations with fresh horses. That sounds remarkably like our modern package delivery networks, with their hubs and sorting centers. That's incredible. So they had the roads, they had this ancient postal service, but it wasn't just for government use, was it?
You're right, it wasn't. Private citizens could use the cursus publicus, too. Imagine that. Sending letters, contracts, even love letters across vast distances, all thanks to this incredible network. It connected people and communities in a way that was previously unimaginable.
It's like they were creating a connected society, kind of like the internet does today. So they understood that information was a resource for everyone, not just a tool for control. But how did they manage the information itself beyond just sending it back and forth quickly? How did they ensure the right message was being conveyed, or should I say the message they wanted conveyed?
That's where propaganda comes in. Roman emperors were masters of shaping the narrative. They used grand monuments, coins designed with specific images, and public pronouncements to project an image of power, legitimacy, and even divine right.
Propaganda, huh? That definitely has some modern-day parallels, doesn't it?
It certainly does. Think about Roman coins. They didn't just issue plain coins. They often depicted emperors as gods or triumphant generals. Every transaction became a mini propaganda campaign. It subtly reinforced the emperor's authority and shaped public perception with every exchange.
Wow, talk about turning everyday objects into tools for influencing people's minds. It really makes you wonder how much of what we see today, even seemingly innocuous things, are designed to influence us.
It's everywhere. And it wasn't just coins. Take the Colosseum, for example. Obviously, it was a place for entertainment, but it was also a symbol of Roman engineering, their wealth, and their cultural dominance. These structures weren't just about aesthetics. They were powerful tools for shaping public perception and legitimizing imperial power.
So they were building their narrative through architecture, imagery, and messaging. They understood that controlling the story was just as important as controlling the territory. Fascinating. But was Rome unique in this approach to information control? I mean, were other empires doing similar things?
Rome wasn't alone. Many other ancient empires also recognized the critical role of information networks. Take the Persian Empire, for instance. They had the Royal Road, this vast network spanning over 1,600 miles, which facilitated communication and trade across their huge territory.
Okay, yeah, I've heard of the Royal Road, but what about empires that didn't have such developed road systems? I mean, how did they manage information flow?
Well, let's take a look at the Inca Empire in South America. They didn't have a written language, but they developed a remarkable system of relay runners. They were called chasquis. These highly trained runners carried messages, sometimes memorized, sometimes encoded on these knotted cords called quipus, across hundreds of miles, connecting the far corners of their empire to the capital.
Wow, a human internet.
Yeah.
It's amazing how they adapted to their circumstances and still created effective ways to manage information. It highlights how universal this need to control information was. Regardless of their culture or technology, these empires understood its power.
It's an important insight. It really makes you wonder, even with all our modern technology, do we truly understand how much information shapes power, both in the past and in our own time?
Speaking of understanding, before we go any further, I think it's time we delve into the knowledge illusion. It's something you mentioned earlier that I'm really curious to explore.
Ah, yes, the knowledge illusion. This is where things get really interesting. Hashtag TTS, the deep dive episode 2024-1024, part 2 of 3. The knowledge illusion. It's this fascinating tendency we have to overestimate how much we actually understand. We often assume we know more than we do.
It's like we're surrounded by information but don't really absorb it all. We just kind of assume it's there if we need it.
Exactly. Think about how many of us could actually explain how a zipper works.
The zipper.
Yeah, we use them every day, but do we really know how they work? We just rely on the fact that somebody somewhere figured it out. And that's enough for us to go about our day.
That's true. I never really thought about it that way. It's like we outsource a lot of our knowledge, trusting that the information is out there if we need it. Kind of like relying on Google, I guess.
Precisely. And this whole knowledge illusion thing, it's not just a modern phenomenon. Even in ancient times, people relied on shared knowledge and institutions for information. Imagine needing to know the latest news from a distant province. You wouldn't just hop on the internet. You'd have to rely on official messengers, word of mouth, or public announcements.
So even without the internet, ancient societies were, in a sense, always connected through these information networks. But relying on those systems must meant that information wasn't always accurate or complete.
Absolutely. Think about those Roman messengers traveling across the empire. A message from, say, Britannia to Rome could take weeks, even months, to arrive.
That's a long time for things to get lost in translation, literally.
Exactly. And in that time, information could be distorted, details omitted, or even intentionally manipulated. The limitations of Roman communication definitely shaped the empire differently than our instant global networks do today.
It's fascinating to think how those limitations shaped their decision-making processes, maybe even their entire understanding of the world. All that time lag, the potential for misinformation. It must have created opportunities for, well, let's just say creative storytelling.
Oh, absolutely. Imagine a provincial governor wanting to downplay a local uprising or maybe exaggerate their own successes. Those delays gave them time to control the narrative before the real story reached Rome.
It's like a real-life game of telephone, where the message changes with every whisper.
Precisely. And speaking of controlling the narrative, I think it's time we address the elephant in the room, propaganda.
Yes. We touched on it earlier with the coins and monuments, but let's dive deeper. How did ancient empires, particularly Rome, use propaganda to maintain their power?
Roman propaganda was incredibly sophisticated. It wasn't just about spreading lies, it was about crafting a narrative, shaping a very specific image of the empire that served their interests.
Okay, so how do they do that? We talked about coins and monuments, but what other methods did they use? How did they spread their message and really get it to stick?
Well, think about public events and spectacles. Things like gladiatorial combats, chariot races, grand processions. These weren't just for entertainment, they were carefully orchestrated displays of Roman power and grandeur, all designed to inspire awe and maybe even a little fear in the masses.
So they were creating a kind of reality show of Roman dominance.
Exactly. It was all about reinforcing this image of Rome as invincible, powerful, destined to rule. And of course, it also served as a distraction, especially for the lower classes, from the realities of daily life under imperial rule.
It's interesting how those methods, even back then, share similarities with modern-day media manipulation, using entertainment and spectacle to shape public opinion.
You're right. The methods evolve, but the underlying goals often remain the same. And it wasn't just about these grand events. They also had to reach people on an everyday level.
Right, back to those coins.
Let's go back to those Roman coins. Instead of just saying Roman coins depicted emperors as gods, let's look at a specific example. Take the famous Augustus of Prima Porta coin. It's not just Augustus the emperor. He's bare-chested, a godlike figure with his hand raised in this gesture of command. This wasn't just pocket change. It was like a tiny, portable monument to imperial power.
It's amazing how much symbolism they packed into something so small. Every time someone used that coin, they were being reminded of the emperor's power.
Exactly. And it wasn't just imagery. The inscriptions on these coins often touted the emperor's achievements, his victories, his piety. Every transaction was a chance to subtly reinforce the official narrative.
So they were using every available channel, from grand spectacles to everyday objects, to spread their message. It really highlights how intentional they were about shaping public perception. But how do those ancient methods compare to the ways information is controlled and manipulated in our modern world? I mean, are there any real similarities?
Well, the tools and technologies have obviously evolved, but the underlying principles remain surprisingly similar. Think about modern corporations. Hashtag TTS, the Deep Dive episode 2024-1024, part 3 of 3. Think about modern corporations. They've really mastered the art of shaping our desires, influencing our choices, even predicting our behavior. They're not so different from those ancient empires in a lot of ways.
Hold on, corporations as empires. That's a pretty bold comparison.
Think about it. They use advertising, branding, even those super sophisticated algorithms to create these narratives, just like those Roman emperors with their coins and monuments, right?
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean. It's not just about selling products. It's about crafting an image, telling a story. And that story, it appeals to us on an emotional level, and it ultimately influences the choices we make.
Exactly. And just like those ancient empires, modern governments and corporations, they're deeply intertwined with these information networks. They depend on them to function.
So you're saying that whoever controls the information, they essentially control the game.
In many ways, yes. Think about the internet. It's the backbone of our modern world. It connects us globally, enables commerce, even shapes how we see reality.
It's true. I mean, it's hard to imagine life without the internet these days. We rely on it for everything.
And that reliance gives immense power to those who control the flow of information online. Governments can censor content, corporations can manipulate algorithms, and individuals can spread misinformation at an alarming rate.
It's a double-edged sword, isn't it? The internet has this amazing potential to empower and connect, but it can also be used to control and manipulate.
Exactly. And this struggle for control over information, it's not a new thing at all. Remember those Roman roads we talked about? They were meticulously planned and controlled by the empire to ensure the smooth flow of information that, ultimately benefited their rule.
So you're suggesting that our modern infrastructure, things like the internet or even our highways, they're mirroring those ancient empires in how they shape information flow.
The parallels are definitely there. Just as those Roman roads facilitated the expansion and control of their empire, our modern information highways, they shape the landscape of power in today's world. They determine who has access to information, how quickly it travels, and how it's ultimately used.
Wow. It makes you wonder, just as those ancient empires rose and fell with their control over information, could the same thing happen to modern powers?
That's a question worth pondering. As we move further into this digital age, with technologies like artificial intelligence advancing at an incredible pace, the stakes just get higher and higher.
So what does all of this mean for us? Are we just pawns in this grand game of information control? Is there anything we can do to navigate this increasingly complex landscape?
We're not powerless. The key is awareness. Being critical thinkers, understanding the forces that are at play in this information age. Just as the ancient Romans had to decipher the messages on those imperial coins, we need to be able to decode the messages bombarding us today.
So it's not just about access to information, it's about understanding the context, the motivations, the potential biases behind the information we consume. We need to be active participants in this information landscape, not just passive consumers.
Exactly. Think about those carefully crafted narratives we talked about earlier. Propaganda. It's not a relic of the past, it's alive and well. Often disguised as news, advertising, even those social media posts we see every day.
It's so easy to get caught up in the constant flow of information, to just accept things at face value.
And that's precisely why it's more important than ever to be informed, to question assumptions, and to seek out multiple perspectives. We can't just blindly trust every headline or every post we see.
So we have a responsibility to be proactive in how we engage with information.
Absolutely. The future of our world, just like those ancient empires, might very well depend on our ability to navigate this complex information landscape with wisdom and discernment.
That's a powerful message to end on. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us today. It's been an incredibly enlightening conversation.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey through the history of information and power. Remember, the key takeaway here is to be mindful, to be aware, and to be engaged. The future of our world might depend on it. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.